if you're playing video games or on screens, then that inherently means you're not doing something else, right? So you're not playing outside and being physically active. Most likely, depends on the nature of the game. You're not reading books. You're not working on your handwriting.
This is Mom Squad Pod, your weekly update on tips, tricks, and all things parenting with Maureen Kyle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Mom Squad Pod, where we talk all things parenting. And today's topic is one that I think a lot of parents need to tackle within their own households, and especially this time of year as we start to get into extracurricular activities, school starting again, homework, and your kids still want some video gaming time. China made a big move. We'll talk about that in just a second, but I want to thank Dr. Kate Eshelman, clinical psychologist with Cleveland Clinic Children's, for being with us to talk about this today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this was an interesting plot twist in China. They just decided that they were going to limit kids' video gaming time to 3 hours a week. And they're restricting it by saying that kids under the age of 18 can only play video games between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. And from what it looks like, video gaming services will have to just kind of boot them off after an hour, but they're limiting that because they were saying it was causing some social issues within the country. Of course, that is very extreme, but if any parent has read that, they have to be thinking, well, how would that play out in my house? Is it a health concern for my child? And how would I feel about that? So, Kate, if you could talk to me first, what is your reaction when you hear that? I know that it's a governmental and it's very extreme, but limiting it for a health reason, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's actually a pretty complex issue. We know that there can be some complications related to kind of mood and behavior and even healthy lifestyle when somebody spends too much time on screens. So there can be complications, and it's very hard to implement a one-size-fits-all rule. That I think we need to look at a particular family and their situation, kids' activities, their own temperaments. What are some of the values? I think especially as we're coming, hopefully making our way out of the pandemic, that a lot of kids socialized through online gameplay, and so I think it's a very complex issue that it's hard to boil down to just this one rule for every family.
Right. And we don't live in China, so we are not facing this restriction. But the 3 hour limit a week, we've talked so much through the pandemic about limiting screen time, and all of a sudden screen time was the only way we were learning and our kids were learning, and you and I on Zoom right now, I mean, we've had an abundance of screen time. Do you think that like 3 hours a week is a good threshold for families to start to think of, or is it a daily limit? I mean, what do you think in terms of kids' health too, especially?
Well, quite honestly, at initial glance, it seems kind of low. So, a few years ago, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a recommendation for 2 hours a day. And then that changed a little bit because it depends on what it's being used for. I think even now, my own children are back in the classroom, but even in the classroom, they're using the screen so much. And then, so much work is being done online on the computer at home. It's not much paper and pencil anymore. So, I think that we have to take, again, the bigger picture into consideration. And upfront, 3 hours seems relatively low. Even with all this work that we do, it's important to have some time that you enjoy, and filtering that into your day. And that seems like a little bit low for that enjoyable activity.
Right. The reason why China was restricting this, they said gaming, especially. I mean, I know that there's a difference between watching TV and gaming, but I mean, it's all screen time. But they were saying specifically that gaming was having an addictive effect on kids, especially younger kids under the age of 18. Again, do you see that as a reality that some kids more susceptible to becoming addicted to gaming than others?
Sure. I do think that there is some evidence, some studies that have been done that suggest that. And I think many of us can relate to having our kids at home and how hard it is to get them off, because that is all that they want to do. So whether it's kind of a true addiction, which I think there's, a possibility of, versus, they just have such a hard time stopping. I definitely think that that happens in many households.
Yeah. Is there a personality type when it comes to kids that you see they do get into that addictive mode when it comes to screen time and gaming?
Sure, I think that there is kind of a personality component and a temperament component. There are plenty of kids that are just as happy to play outside with kids in the neighborhood, or, to take the dogs out back and chase the ball. So not every child, seeks out this screen time in the same way. And certainly there are kids that just have, more difficulty managing frustration and emotion tolerance. So when they have to do what they don't want to do, in this case, getting off the screen, they are more likely to react. And then I think too, we have to watch very carefully the nature of the games that are being played, because I think that plays a role as well.
What games do you think? What nature of it? When you say nature of games, which ones are you talking about specifically?
Sure, I think, and I'm not so familiar with the titles. I am not a gamer myself, but a lot of them are, you know, aggressive, aggressive
Mhm.
games where they're shooting or killing, as opposed to kind of sports-based games or racing kind of games. And so I think, potentially the more violent a game is, the more it could impact, especially the developing brain.
And how is that? I feel like there's been studies over the years that, and who knows who's behind these studies, but coming to you as a psychologist, violent video games, there's studies that say they don't have a huge impact on or influence on kids. Then I've seen a study that says, it does make them kind of numb to the idea of violence when they are seeing such realistic images of shooting and killing. Um, where do you think parents' mind frame should be when it's introducing gaming and having those type of games in the house? Do you think we should err on less violence? Does it have a big impact on kids?
Well, I do think, and the games do have ratings. And so I think just like when you're choosing a movie for your family to watch, that parents should heed those ratings, that their games are intended for individuals of a certain age. And I do think, to your point, the technology associated with video games, sometimes I think, especially for younger children, it's harder to kind of distinguish between reality and a game. And a part of that's developmentally appropriate, kind of this magical thinking when we're very small, and, what's reality and what's pretend. And so when you are playing such realistic games, it does become a little bit harder to separate that.
What about brain development in this case? Where under the age of 18, I think that's where they can draw the line of adult and child legally. But when it comes to brain development, 18 and under, where are kids, where are they still developing, and what personality traits and function is being affected at what age?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, what I think, to your point, 18 is the legal age when we become an adult, but really the brain goes on to developing into the early to mid 20s. And, different stages or different parts of the brain and personality and temperament are developing across time. Those personality traits are, those start early, as many of us probably know, with our little ones, and how those have kind of continued as they've continued to grow. But things like executive functioning, so our ability to kind of organize ourselves and kind of make good choices and really stop bad choices, that's I think really kind of what's important here is we get these older middle school, high school kids that are playing, and that's the area that really continues to develop up into the 20s.
Yeah. Are there any signs? Have you ever had a patient, or do you see instances where there are signs that a child's development is being interrupted in some way because of a gaming or a screen time habit? How would parents recognize that too?
Sure, and I think again, great questions and big picture, because when we're talking about screen time habits, we are talking about what the child is consuming, but we're
Mhm.
also talking about, if you're playing video games or on screens, then that inherently means you're not doing something else, right? So you're not playing outside and being physically active. Most likely, depends on the nature of the game. You're not reading books. You're not working on your handwriting. You're so these other, you're not playing with other children in a way that you would have before screen time, right? You're not engaging in imaginative, or what we call kind of that dramatic play, where you're using your imagination and being creative, because a lot of it's being done for you, right? You're entering somebody else's creation. So it's not necessarily just the game that you're playing or the fact that you're on screens, but it's the things that you're not doing. And so then I think when you look at kind of what are the signs, I think you as parents step back and look at the big picture. Okay, when was the last time they played with the neighbor down the street? Are they joining us at the dinner table for dinner? Kind of looking at the impact of the screen time on the other activities. Are they choosing not to play their sport this year because they seem so focused on video games? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I've seen lists before of like, excessive screen time and gaming can lead to obesity and also those social skills that kids need when interacting with other kids and adults. Do you think that is one of the major, I don't want to say new, but developing health problems that we've seen in recent years?
I think it can be. Ideally, these kids, while they might be on screens when they're at home, and again, I think looking at the bigger picture, because many kids were at home throughout the pandemic, but kind of that aside, hopefully they're at school, they're interacting with teachers, they're speaking to the people that work in the cafeteria, that there are opportunities to practice these skills outside of playing video games. But again, if that's all the child is doing, then absolutely.
Yeah. Can this, in your opinion, hours and hours of whether it's gaming, whether it's they're on their phones playing a game or scrolling through social media, especially for teens, are you seeing that lead to depression or higher instances of depression?
Yeah, there is increased, there has been research that shows increased mood concerns. And again, there's a lot of factors. I think a lot of times on social media, only the best is portrayed. So you look at everyone else's perfect life and then you start comparing that to yourself. With a lot of social media, there's an opportunity for bullying in a way that wasn't present prior to the bullying was present prior to the onset of social media, but not available in the same way. And again, just extended time on screens can have an impact on mood. And finally, especially screens before bed, which I think is very common for most of us, but it can impact sleep. And then when sleep quality is poor, then that can impact mood.
Yeah. And I don't think it's any surprise. I think every parent knows that sitting a kid in front of a TV or letting your kid play video games, it puts them, I've always heard like the zombie-like state. And we do it too as adults, where we're zombie scrolling before we go to bed. That's not a myth, right? I mean, like our brains change and kind of go into I don't know, like a low power mode. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure exactly about that, but what we do know is that one, light, the impact of the light on your sleep cycle is an impact. And then also, when you're putting all this in your brain right before bed, that affects how you sleep. Your brain does not shut down. Your brain continues to think and process throughout the night. And so when we're giving it more to think about and process before we fall asleep, it's going to most likely impact or create a less restful sleep environment.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening and watching thinking, there's nothing wrong with video games. I've played them my whole life and nothing's wrong with me. And I learned a lot. And I think back to like, whenever I hear this about screen time, and I have little ones, they're not into gaming yet, but I'll put my kids in front of Sesame Street because I remember I learned letters on Sesame Street. Are there benefits to having some of these learning games that schools are now incorporating, or having those shows that they do teach letters? Do kids pick up in any way? I mean, what kind of benefits are we seeing from some of these?
Yeah, and I think that's important. This is not, not all good or all bad. There can be benefits. So if you're looking at educational shows, whether it's academic education where you're learning the letters or, colors or that sort of thing, also the social emotional, a lot of the early childhood shows promote that cooperation and friendship and empathy. So there can be value to that. Again, through the pandemic, the opportunity for our kids to socialize this way, that was better than nothing. So it's not, all good or all bad. It's, how you weigh it and balance it in with everything else.
Yeah. Is there any truth to, and I feel like I've realized this in my own family, and this might be something that all parents realize, but I want your expertise to weigh in here too. Like when mom guilt here, I need a half hour break. I need to cook dinner I need 20 minutes to a half hour, go sit in front of the TV. And then when I tell them, okay, it's time for dinner, then there's meltdowns, or maybe there's meltdowns later in the day. And I have to think back, did I give them too much screen time? Is that the reason why? What do you think? Is that a reason why we should be limiting screen time? Is there a correlation between watching a show and then a meltdown later?
I think there could be. Now, in reality, if we're talking about watching a show, then that probably is not causing the meltdown later. Again, I think what is very hard is it's hard for many kids to shift between activities. We all want to do what we want to do when we want to do it. So if I want to watch the show and you tell me that I have to stop, that might be the cause for the meltdown, as opposed to, the fact the show itself. So, again, we know that it can affect mood and behavior, but also kind of looking, well, maybe the kids didn't sleep as well last night, or they're hungry, dinner's late because we're running late because of life, and they're actually melting down because they're hungry. It might have nothing to do with the show.
Yeah. I think every parent also worries about the addiction aspect, to go back to that too. I mean, and that's really kind of what kick-started this conversation. Is that's what China's saying, is that it becomes an addiction of screen time. Which is something that as kids, I don't know if we really grew up with as much. And then you go back our parents' generation and they definitely didn't have it. But then again, the technology that kids have to use to keep up with life, they have to have some of it within there. Do you think we're on a path of some sort of dangerous addiction, or some sort of dangerous change in behavior, or detrimental in any way when it comes to physical health, mental health, or just changing personalities?
I think we do have to be careful. Again, I think it's very hard to make a sweeping statement because, even kids that don't want to end when they have to, and it's hard, like maybe they're in the middle of a game and just like adults, if I'm in the middle of something and my child needs my help, I'm often going to ask them, wait just a minute, let me finish what I'm doing, right? But as parents, we don't necessarily give them that same choice. So, again, I think that a lot of what we see can be attributed to kind of less devious or concerning factors. But I do think we have to be careful. I mean, I think certainly from a health standpoint, obesity, and for many years has been on the rise. But when you have a child or an adult sitting in front of a screen for hours on end, I think, not only are they not physically active, but a lot of times there's mindless eating, right? So you might go grab a box of cereal or a bag of chips, and you might eat while you're playing. So you're kind of eating less healthy foods, probably in a mindless way, and not engaging in physical activity. And those certainly are concerns. So, I do think, while we know that there's concerns for impact on socialization and physical health and mood and sleep, I think if not tended to, and if no one's overseeing it, that absolutely concerns can develop.
Yeah. So if a parent comes to you and says, how do I start to, my kid doesn't want to give up screen time, or where do I even start to get through to them on, and I know this could depend on age, but on limits and what's healthy, and how do you have that talk in your own household?
Sure. I think part of the goal is to educate them as to why, right? I've noticed that, and we have to be very careful with all of these things, right? But like, I've noticed you haven't been playing outside as much. And so I want us to play outside after dinner, or, I want you to walk the dogs with me, or that sort of thing. So kind of educating them on why it is. And you can defer to, the pediatrician who says it's not a good idea, or this article you read, or this podcast you heard. You can blame it on somebody else.
Yeah.
Kind of educating them as to why, And then set the expectations. So going forward, we're going to be off by 7 o'clock, or whatever it is in your household. So setting the expectation. Oftentimes when we think about this is a form of managing behavior, right? So with behavior management, it's good to give warnings. So if the expectation is that we're going to be off at 7 o'clock, at 6:45, you give a warning. At 6:55, you give a warning, and then at 7 o'clock, it's time to get off. So you want to educate, kind of give clear statements about what the expectation is going to be, and kind of warn them through the process. And I always, recommend this for parents. For you guys, it's a lot of deep breathing because they're not going to want to do it. It's not going to be easy. It will likely get worse before it gets better. And that's where a lot of that deep breathing is very helpful. So we don't necessarily expect that the kids are going to be happy about it, but we do expect that they're going to comply with the parents' rules.
Mm, yeah. With parents too, here I am saying, oh, it's the kids who are getting addicted. Parents almost seem to have that addiction too. I don't want to say that to blame parents in any way, because I'm a parent who has to be plugged in all day as well. I'm emailing at night, and I always feel guilty whenever I'm sending that email. And I try to tell them, hold on, mommy just has to send a quick email. This is for work. But I feel like when I do that, I'm not modeling the best behavior. So is it a matter of, this is a family rule, no, and phones go in a certain room, and how much does our behavior influence what they see and what they do, even at young ages?
Sure. And I want to be clear that what we talk about is simple, but not easy, right?
Right.
So all of these things are best case scenarios. And yes, our behavior does influence theirs in a couple of ways. One is just, as you said, modeling, right? So if I have my phone in my hand, which a lot of times I do, similarly checking emails, we're always accessible these days. And so, if I have my phone in my hand and I'm on screens, then that shows them, that that's okay. And actually that's the way that we go through the day, is on a screen. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that, to your point earlier, if I'm on my phone, and, I'm checking emails or reviewing charts or whatever it may be, and I need a minute where I'm not interrupted, right? It's very easy to let them go get on, to not get them off. And so not only am I showing them that this is how we do it, but when I'm on my screen, I can't control what they're doing. And so those are some ways that it impacts their behavior.
Yeah. I think overall, anytime we have any of these questions, it all boils down to, am I leading my child to have a healthy life? And so before we wrap up, I just kind of want to go over, I know we've talked about a lot of topics here, but just overall, when I hear an entire country is limiting video game screen time to just 3 hours a week and only on weekends, I'm thinking, am I doing something wrong with my kids, or am I doing something unhealthy? Are they okay when it comes to maybe an hour a day? Or if it ends up being between school and afternoon, 2 hours a day. Overall, just in general, to kind of summarize, am I okay? Are my kids okay if they're doing more than 3 hours a week?
Yes, I think you're okay. I think your kids are okay. And again, that's where I think each parent needs to step back and take a look at, how do your kids seem? Do they seem happy? Do they seem calm and relaxed most of the time? Or do they seem pretty irritable and frustrated and seem to have difficulty coping and controlling things? And, do they seem to be sleeping okay? Do they seem to be eating okay? Are we enjoying time together as a family? Are we, and every family's different in what they're able to do, but are we walking the dog together sometimes? Are we able to sit down at the table together sometimes? And so just kind of stopping to check in and take a look at how your kids seem, right? And if you have concerns, then it's time to step back and look, maybe it's related to video games, maybe it's not, but so then if we have concerns about the kids, what is causing those concerns? And it's okay, speak to your pediatrician, seek out, behavioral health services, talk to professionals at the school, they're well-versed in this. But I think, yes, your kids are okay.
Okay. It's great information. It's always a great topic to tackle, because I feel like as kids go through different phases, parents have different questions, and as we develop in technology and as our kids are learning from home or maybe learning a little bit more off of screens in school, it's always a huge question that we've had. Dr. Kate Eshelman, thank you so much for all of the great information, and thanks to all of you for joining us on the Mom Squad Pod. We'll see you right back here next time.
Thanks for listening to Mom Squad Pod with Maureen Kyle from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update. And find more on everything you heard here on WKYC.com and on the WKYC app.